10% tariffs placed on 8 European countries to try to force the sale of Greenland. Those tariffs will go up to 25% per June 1st if no deal is reached. The president is trying to essentially strong arm the European Union into accepting a deal to give Greenland to the United States. Now, again, we know the stock market per the charts has been borderline, hanging off a cliff near a breakdown. We knew we had a bull flag on the 10-year yield. And again, on Friday, we saw a breakout occur. This could be the start of something much bigger for the stock market. Let's get right into it here. Here's the S&P 500. Friday, we saw a little bit of a down move. All right, overall, we've been chopping just underneath all-time highs. The biggest factor here remains the factor that I have revealed to you literally months ago that told me the markets were going to have struggles up in this range. And again, if we just look at this, we can see that this parallel, so these lines are perfectly parallel. Look at this, guys. You can bring it down to this right here. You extend it right out to the bull market high and look at what you get. You got our high here, and now we're right underneath it. This again tells me that the S&P, while it could inch up a little bit, the odds favor a bigger move to the downside as we saw in 2021. Potentially as big as 20% plus downside, like we saw again at the bull market peak of 2021 and the bear market of 2022. Notice again, this parallel is an amazing one because it starts in 2020 of March at the COVID lows, connects through the low of the bear market in 2022 and each subsequent low thereafter, and the liberation tariff sell-off in April 2025 bottomed out right there. The high is taken to the bull market high here in 2021, and we see again that the markets are right there. And what we can tell from this when we use technical analysis, which is logic-based approach, is that off of the low line, we get the big up moves, and then off the top line, we get the big down moves, right? And again, up and then down, and then up and down, and back and forth, ultimately just left and right. Essentially, the market's getting capped, triggering a sell-off. That's the idea here, that the markets, again, could be setting up for a bigger sell-off. Now, one of the things that I'm watching to see if this triggers, and it may trigger on Tuesday, right, since the markets are closed on Monday. So this may trigger on Tuesday. We take this low from the liberation sell-off lows, we drag it right up here, and what do we have? Look at this, guys. This trend line connects through these lows, and we're right on that line. And so ultimately on Tuesday, when we see the markets reopen, are we below this level? Do we close below? Do we confirm? Or is there a walk back on the tariff situation? Is there a resolution? And by the way, it's not a coincidence that these type of tariffs were levied essentially as soon as the weekend began of a 3-day weekend. All right, the Trump administration is very smart on this. Whenever they're going to release bad news that they think the stock market will take negatively, what do? They put it on a weekend, and they do it as soon as the weekend starts to let the markets adapt and kind of grasp it. So it's not an immediate emotional reaction, right? So if you do it on a Wednesday at 9:30 when the stock market's open and you release this news, panic selling ensues, right? But if you do it on a Friday night or Saturday morning, the market has the max time, especially on a 3-day holiday weekend for the stock market, to relax and kind of figure it out and see, again, is this really hugely negative or maybe just a minor negative? And maybe there's a resolution here. We'll have to see and watch. All right. But again, I think that's very important to understand. So quickly looking at this chart on the S&P again, is it going to break here? This would be the break point where we would expect a bigger decline. Again, you got to understand that these type of moves, and look at this, guys, as well. If we take a look at this trend line, and this you could see very clearly right here, going back to the October 2023 low to this low in 2024 August, we hit it here. Notice when you broke this trend line, look at how big this sell-off was. And so here you have another trend line. It's even more vertical. So this implies a sharper sell-off. And again, that's kind of scary considering what we saw with the liberation sell-off. And the question is, what's the trigger? Is it more tariffs? Is it the economy? Is it the currency markets? Is it the bond markets?
And in retaliation, the EU prepared what they called the bazooka option, up to $100 billion in tariffs on the US. So in this video, I'm going to give you the latest on this situation, what I think will happen to the market. Is this the event that finally gives us that post Q1 correction that I was talking about in my projection? For those of you that watched my 2026 video, you guys know that I expect a correction to happen sometime during Q1 or shortly after Q1. And if that happens, while you'll want to be ready for one of the best opportunities of the market, you can see here that the average intra-year drawdown during midterm election years like this year is minus 18%. So are these new tariffs on Denmark as well as Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and Finland, are these tariffs going to actually stay in place? And is this announcement going to tank the market? We're also going to go over the leaders in the S&P 500. And in my next video, I will give you my favorite stocks so far this year that I think are undervalued and are likely ready to soar for the next year or two to come. And yes, I will be going back to more regular posts now that the holidays are over and I'm back here full time. Let's get right into it. So as I said, the Supreme Court is yet to rule on whether Trump's tariffs are constitutional or not. Now, they were supposed to vote on this last week. However, they didn't, and they didn't really set a date. However, every indication points to a potential vote or a potential ruling coming as soon as this week. Now, this completely clashes with the tariffs that we see. If this right here is going to be deemed unconstitutional, then I doubt that the tariffs on the EU, the new tariffs on the EU, are going to pass as well. And because there is no shortage of excitement from the Trump administration on a day-to-day basis, even on Saturday or Sunday, we see the White House tweeted this out just now that the S&P 500 had 37 record highs, 18 record highs for the Dow Jones in 2025, meaning they are signaling, in my opinion, that they're still very focused on the market. Now, it doesn't mean that the acquisition of Greenland isn't important to the US. I think that they were not going to do this militarily, but they're going to try to purchase Greenland. Now, this is not a new thing, by the way. This has happened many times in history. And the reason being, first of all, where it lies geographically, and secondarily, because of the mineral-rich environment surrounding the island. And there is this fear that either Russia or China will get to it first. Now, is the market going to tank because of it? Well, one market that is currently open, by the way, the stock market is closed on January 19th. I don't know when you're watching this. If you're watching this before, remember the stock market is closed for MLK on January 19th. If you're watching this after, then it doesn't matter. But Bitcoin hasn't tanked and actually is holding the support line that we talked about, this 94,800 support line bouncing off of it. Now, it is not up tremendously, but it hasn't tanked. And Ethereum is up by 1%. So either the market just doesn't believe in the Trump tariff back and forth anymore, or they're expecting the Supreme Court to rule the tariffs unconstitutional, thereby deeming these new tariffs pretty much moot, or they think that the Trump administration is going to taco really quick on these tariffs based on the European retaliation. Now, my view is this can turn into a shit show really quick depending on how far this is dragged out. So if by this week we get a ruling on the previous tariffs that they're unconstitutional and the Trump administration says, haha, just kidding, or let's actually take this to the negotiating table, or let's get the people of Greenland to vote on a referendum, then I don't see this being the event that leads us to a potential correction. Now, I'm on record as still saying that 2026 will likely be a bullish year, but it will not be straightforward. In my opinion, it will be choppy. And the news cycle is already proving that. It's only January 18th as of the time of this recording. Now, I already showed you this, that the average drawdown during midterm elections is minus 18%. But hopefully this makes you salivate here if you are looking to take advantage of this and make money. A couple of things here. One, if you look at the average drawdown, we average almost a 10% correction every year, but the market ends up green to end the year most years. Now, if we're comparing this to the late 90s because of the AI cycle, you could see that from 97 to 99, we actually had 3 years of 10% corrections or more. I had somebody comment about my projection on the S&P 500 that what is the catalyst for seeing a 10% or more correction this year? We had one last year, so we're not going to have one this year. In these super cycles, in these growth super cycles, it's actually very common to not only have multiple double-digit years, but with that volatility also comes multiple double-digit drawdowns back to back to back. And we had a double-digit drawdown in 2023, not in 2024, but we had one in 2025. I would not be surprised to see one in 2026, especially if you marry this with the fact that the average intra-year drawdown for the midterm elections is minus 18%. As a matter of fact, going back to 1946, as far back as this chart goes, we have never not had an intra-year drawdown during a midterm election. Now, if you've been following this channel, you already know that Costco is one of the stocks that I'm most bullish on, especially as I said, this year, you likely want to start diversifying away from tech. Now, I do think big tech and Mag 7 will have its moment in the sun at some point this year. But if you look at the year-to-date returns of the S&P 500, not a single one of these companies is a Mag 7 company. And as some of these stocks become undervalued, like in my opinion, Costco was, you definitely do want to diversify in them. So if the tariffs are shot down, I think Costco will have a big run back to 1,000. I think Walmart is going to have probably a new all-time high. I think Target will potentially run as well. And although I just said that it's a good idea to diversify some away from big tech, obviously I do think the big chip companies, Nvidia, AMD, if those tariffs are shot down, they will have a big run because, I mean, they were performing pretty well even with the tariffs in place. But if you remove those restrictions entirely, then Nvidia, AMD, Broadcom, I think those companies will run. And then obviously, I think that the Chinese companies can also have a run. If you look at Baba, it's just continuing to break out, retest. And I think Baba and some of the bigger Chinese companies can run as well. I would also pay attention to retailers that have a lot of China exposure like Nike. And even though Apple is not subject to a lot of Chinese tariffs, I do think that it will run just based on the story. Obviously, Amazon will likely hit all-time highs. But keep in mind, this development here definitely throws a wrench in the momentum, but could also provide us with a pullback opportunity. If the market pulls back next week because it hasn't yet digested this news, and we don't yet have a Supreme Court decision yet regarding the Trump tariffs, then that could give us a setup on some of these stocks that I talked about to play the potential slapdown of those tariffs by the Supreme Court eventually when it comes around. And the fact that the Trump administration tweeted this today, even after they announced those tariffs on Friday, obviously they're going to be focused on the market heavily.
We saw the fear and greed index move from neutral over into greedy territory. And we look at the most recent investor sentiment survey, we also saw this week that the bullishness was jumping up. It went from a reading of 42.5 to 49.5. Look at the neutral category. It went from 27.5, dropping down to 22.3. And the bears also stepped back a little bit from 30% to 28.2. However, even though we have these bullish readings, it does not mean we are out of the woods just yet. Let's not forget, on the daily time frame, we have a rising wedge pattern, which is normally bearish for stocks. We've had one close below it, almost a second close below it, and then right here on Friday, we got to close below the rising trend line at a time when the MACD indicator is just flatlined out there. But I do want to warn you guys because we do have conflicting signals out there. One of the signals I was concerned about for a little bit of time was the difference between the 2-year and the 10-year yield. I was worried about it rising on the way up. Normally that can have bearish implications for stocks. And notice recently it has started to pull back here just a bit. Also, if we come over and look at the Dow Jones on the chart on the top versus the transportation index, notice this week, even as the Dow Jones basically formed a doji candle, which essentially is a candle of indecision, see a small little wick on top, small wick on the bottom with a very small candle body. Well, look at the transportation index. It has been on one heck of a move up. Ever since the transportation index has broken out from this declining trend line, it's just been up, and away. And even this week, when we come over and look at the SPY versus the HYG, which is going to be high yield bonds, and we can think about this as risk on, risk off, declining trend line, up higher, and we have that doji candle. And the reason why I say this is so important, look at the strength difference in the Russell 2000. You see we've went up quite a bit over the last 2 weeks or so, and then we compare that over here to the QQQs. Notice it's just been chopping around, having a hard time getting out of its own way, and the SPY kind of just chopping around, also having a hard time getting out of its own way.